I still remember the way he looked that night. Quiet, precise, every move measured like someone who'd rehearsed life itself. I was just a waitress in a small-town diner off Highway 17, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and maple syrup. He came in near closing time, dressed too neatly for our cracked vinyl booths. A silver pen glimmered from his pocket, and under his arm, he carried a worn leather folio that looked older than anything in the room. He ordered black coffee. No sugar. No small talk. But when he opened that folio, I caught a glimpse of something: faded parchment, delicate handwriting, and a red wax seal that had cracked in half. I wasn't supposed to look, of course, but curiosity has a way of ignoring rules, especially when life feels stuck in repetition. That night, I refilled his cup twice and noticed how his hand trembled ever so slightly when he turned the pages. The man couldn't have been more than 60, but there was a heaviness in him, like someone carrying unfinished goodbyes. When he left, he tucked a $50 bill under his plate, far too much for a cup of coffee, and walked out into the rain without saying a word. That's when I noticed he'd left the folio behind. For a moment, I thought about running after him, but the downpour outside was punishing, and his car, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, had already disappeared into the darkness. I hesitated, then picked up the folio, intending to keep it safe until morning. But when I felt the weight of it and saw the faint gold initials embossed on the flap, RLW, something inside me whispered that this was no ordinary lost item. I didn't know it yet, but opening that folio would change the course of my life and expose secrets people had spent decades trying to bury. That night, I learned that sometimes fate disguises itself as a forgotten thing, left behind just long enough to test your conscience. The diner closed at midnight, and I was the last one left, wiping down the counter while the radio hummed some old tune about heartbreak and second chances. The folio sat there beside the napkin dispenser, too elegant for our chipped countertop. I must have circled it half a dozen times before giving in. It wasn't greed. It was something else, that strange pull when you sense a story is hiding right in front of you. I slipped off the thin strap and opened it, just enough to peek inside. The smell of aged paper hit me first, that dry, sweet scent like old libraries. There were several documents inside, all handwritten in looping ink, and one envelope sealed with the same broken wax I'd noticed earlier. But what caught my eye most wasn't the paper itself. It was a pressed violet, perfectly preserved, tucked between two pages. I froze. Who presses a flower inside something that looks like a legal document? I turned it gently, and beneath the flower was a line written in elegant cursive, "For the one who still remembers." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what they meant, but they didn't belong to business or money. They belonged to memory, to love, maybe even regret. That's when I heard a soft tap on the glass door. A man in a raincoat stood outside, motionless, watching me. For a second, I thought it was him, the man with the silver pen, but this one was younger, leaner, and his stare felt sharper, like a blade. He lifted his hand again, tapping once more, slow and deliberate. I panicked, shoving the folio into my bag. When I unlocked the door, the man asked if anyone had been in recently, an older gentleman, gray hair, black car. His voice was polite, but his eyes weren't. I lied. I said no one like that had come by. He nodded, thanked me, and walked away, disappearing into the rain. But before he turned, I caught the edge of something under his coat, the glint of a silver badge. That night, I didn't sleep. The folio stayed under my pillow, and the question that kept me awake was no longer what it contained, but why someone else was already looking for it. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It waits until you lie, and then it follows you home. By morning, the world had gone back to its usual rhythm, trucks rumbling past the diner, the smell of bacon in the air, and the regulars teasing me for yawning through the breakfast rush. But I couldn't stop thinking about that folio. It sat in my bag, whispering possibilities every time I walked past it. Around 9, as the bell above the door jingled, I looked up, and there he was. The man from last night. His suit was still immaculate, but his eyes were different now, frantic behind calm manners. "I believe I left something here," he said quietly. I felt the air tighten around me. My first instinct was honesty, to hand it over and be done, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he scanned the room, as if expecting someone else to burst in. Or maybe it was the faint bruise at the base of his jaw, half hidden beneath his collar. "What kind of something?" I asked, pretending to wipe the counter. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A folio. Leather.
Brown.
Very old. It contains personal materials." I swallowed hard, remembering the violet and the words, "For the one who still remembers." "I haven't seen it." I lied again. My voice cracked slightly, and I prayed he didn't notice. He studied me for a beat too long. Then, with surprising gentleness, he placed another $50 bill on the counter. "If you happen to find it," he said, "keep it safe. No one else should see what's inside. Not even me." And then he left. Not long after, the younger man from the rain came in, this time flashing his badge outright. Federal. He claimed to be investigating an ongoing case involving stolen historical property. He didn't say from where, but the weight in his tone told me it wasn't small. That was my test. I could have handed it over right then and walked away clean. But something about both men, their contradictions, their fear, told me that truth wasn't sitting neatly on either side. I decided to find out what was inside, but I made myself a promise. I wouldn't sell it, or expose it, or use it to hurt anyone. I would just understand. If I was wrong, I'd return it quietly. If I was right, well, maybe it wasn't just a story anymore. Maybe it was mine too. The line between curiosity and courage is razor thin, and that morning, I didn't yet know which side I was standing on. I waited until after dark to open it again. The diner had emptied out, and the neon sign outside blinked through the blinds in tired red flashes. My hands trembled as I undid the strap and spread the papers out across my small kitchen table. There were at least a dozen documents, each carefully written in the same looping script. At first, I thought they were letters. But as I read, I realized they were confessions, or something close to it. The first page was dated April 3rd, 1976. The writer spoke of a business partnership that began with pure ideals and ended in ruin. He described a betrayal, one involving land, inheritance, and something called the Veil Agreement. The name didn't ring a bell, but the tone did. Regretful, mournful, almost poetic. Then came something even stranger, a notarized page bearing the name Richard L. Whitford. That matched the initials embossed on the folio, RLW. I remembered the local gossip about that name. The Whitford family owned half the valley 30 years ago, mills, farmlands, even a reservoir. But the family vanished after a scandal involving forged deeds and missing funds. Some said the old patriarch, Richard Whitford himself, had fled the country. Others said he died long ago. But here, in my hands, was his handwriting and his confession. In the middle of the pages was a smaller envelope, sealed with wax again, this one unbroken. Across it, written faintly in pencil, were the words, "Not to be opened until the truth returns home."
Home.
That word sat heavy in my chest. Inside the folio, I also found a folded sketch of an estate, a large mansion beside a lake, with a willow tree drawn near the waterline. I recognized it immediately. That was Lakeshore Estate, just 10 miles north of town, now abandoned and fenced off. People said it was haunted, but I'd served enough truckers and hunters to know the only ghosts there were made of secrets. As I studied the map, something slipped from between the pages, a small key, tied to a violet ribbon. It looked delicate, but it was real metal, cold and old. I held it up to the light, and the shadow it cast looked like the shape of a heart. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the folio wasn't just a relic, it was an invitation. Every mystery tests the heart in two ways, by what you find and by what you're willing to risk finding it. The next morning, I drove out to Lakeshore Estate before dawn. The fog clung low to the ground, turning the old mansion into a silhouette of ghosts. The iron gates were chained, but half-rusted. One good shove and they creaked open just enough for me to slip through. I carried the folio in a satchel and the small key in my pocket, wrapped in the violet ribbon like a promise I didn't understand yet. Every step toward the house made my chest tighten. The windows were boarded, and ivy crawled over the stones like the years themselves were trying to erase the place. Inside, the air was still, heavy with dust and echoes. My flashlight caught fragments of a forgotten world, portraits crooked on the wall, a teacup shattered near the hearth, and a grand piano draped in cobwebs. I followed the sketch I'd found. It led me to the library, or what was left of it. Bookshelves had collapsed under their own weight, papers scattered like fallen leaves. In the far corner, just as the drawing showed, stood a small desk beside a tall window that looked out onto the lake. The drawer was locked. I held my breath and tried the key. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for that very moment. Inside the drawer was a single velvet pouch. I opened it, and there, wrapped in silk, was another letter. But this one wasn't from Richard Whitford. It was to him. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and the ink had faded to a soft brown. "My dearest Richard," it began, "you told me the truth would destroy everything. But it was never the truth that ruined us. It was the lie you chose instead." The letter went on to describe a secret child, born the same year the Whitford scandal broke, a child hidden for her safety, never acknowledged, never claimed. It ended with a plea. "If you ever find this again, remember our daughter deserves the life we could not have. Her name is Lily." I froze. My mother's name was Lily. I stumbled back, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't. The dates matched. The geography matched. The quiet fragments of my own childhood, my mother's tears when she thought I wasn't looking, the old photographs she burned when I was 12, they all came rushing back. The man who'd sat in my diner with the silver pen wasn't just anyone. He was the last surviving Whitford, and by blood, my grandfather. The priceless document everyone wanted wasn't about money or property. It was about me. Sometimes the truth doesn't just change your life. It rearranges who you thought you were. I drove back from the estate in silence, the world around me a blur of motionless fog and disbelief. I wanted to scream, but the shock sat too deep in my chest to move. My mother had died 5 years earlier, taking so many half-truths with her. Now, in one morning, the puzzle I didn't know existed had assembled itself, and I was standing in the center of it. When I pulled into my driveway, a black sedan was parked across the street. The younger man, the federal agent, leaned against it, arms crossed. He straightened when he saw me. "Miss," he called, walking over. "We need to talk." I clutched my bag tighter. "About what?" "The folio. And Richard Whitford. You've been seen at the estate." My heart skipped. "You followed me?" He didn't deny it. "You shouldn't have gone there alone. You're in the middle of something bigger than you realize." He reached into his coat, not for a gun but for a photo, an aerial shot of the property, circled in red. That folio contains evidence tied to one of the largest trust embezzlements in state history. The Whitford case was never closed. People are still trying to clean up what that man left behind. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I had just found out I was part of what that man left behind, but something in his tone stopped me. He wasn't here to protect anyone. He was here to retrieve something valuable. And the way he said evidence told me he didn't care who got crushed in the process. "I don't have it," I said again, this time steady. He looked at me for a long moment, then leaned in close enough for me to smell the rain on his coat. "Be careful who you lie to," he whispered. "You're not the only one he trusted." He left without another word. That night, the older man, my grandfather, returned to the diner. I hadn't seen exhaustion like that in anyone's eyes before. He sat in the same booth, ordered the same coffee, and when I approached, he looked up and said quietly, "You've opened it, haven't you?" I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. He nodded, almost relieved. "Then you understand why I couldn't destroy it, why I left it there." I slid into the booth across from him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who deserves to know." His hand trembled as he reached into his coat and placed a second envelope on the table. "They'll come after you for it now. They think it's about land and money." "But it was never about that." It's about what was taken from a child, and what I couldn't return. Before I could respond, headlights flashed across the diner windows, the same black sedan. He looked at me, eyes full of urgency. Whatever happens, don't let them have the folio. Not until you've read everything. Then, without warning, he stood, slipped out the back door into the night, and vanished once again. I sat frozen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left. Outside, I heard doors slam and voices rise, and in that instant, I realized that both men, the one who'd lost everything and the one chasing him, were converging on me. The truth had woken up, and it was no longer waiting to be found. It was coming straight toward me. Sometimes life doesn't ask if you're ready for your legacy. It just hands it to you, wrapped in danger and choice. The diner lights flickered as the black sedan pulled up, its headlights slicing through the rain. My breath came shallow and fast. Through the fogged window, I saw the younger agent step out, his face hard as marble. I knew, without question, that he wasn't coming in for coffee. I glanced toward the kitchen, the back door where my grandfather had escaped moments earlier, but something inside me stopped. I was done running from stories I didn't understand. The folio was hidden beneath the counter, wrapped in a towel next to the silverware tray. I slid it into my apron and waited. When the bell over the door finally chimed, the sound felt like a verdict. He walked in slowly, scanning the empty booths. "Where is he?" "Gone," I said. He studied me, rain dripping from his coat. "And the documents?" I met his stare. "Safe," he sighed, taking a step closer. "You think you're protecting him? That man defrauded entire communities. Thousands of families lost their savings because of what's in that folio." His words hit hard. For the first time, doubt cracked through my anger. Could my grandfather truly have been both a victim and a villain? But before I could answer, the door opened again, and there he was. My grandfather, soaked to the bone, face pale but eyes steady. He stepped inside slowly, leaning on the counter as if gathering the last of his strength. "She's not part of this," he said. "Let her go." The agent's hand brushed his holster, but my grandfather lifted a trembling palm. "You want the papers, take them. But you'll read the last page before you decide who's guilty." He turned to me. "Please." I hesitated only a moment before handing over the folio. The agent tore it open, flipping through until he reached the final document, a notarized letter, sealed in gold ink. He read silently, his expression changing from authority to disbelief. It wasn't a confession. It was an exoneration. The real culprit, the one who had orchestrated the fraud, had been Richard's brother, Samuel Whitford. The patriarch had taken the blame to protect the brother's widow and her infant daughter. That widow was my grandmother. That daughter, my mother. My grandfather had lived as a fugitive all those years not because he was guilty, but because he'd chosen loyalty over self-defense. The agent's voice faltered. This changes everything." Richard sank onto the stool beside me, eyes shining with tears he didn't wipe away. "I wanted the truth to reach you before I was gone. You're the only part of our story that's still unbroken." Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle, as though the sky itself exhaled. The agent folded the folio closed. "We'll need to verify this," he said quietly. "But I'll make sure they know." My grandfather nodded, the fight draining from him at last. He reached into his coat and pulled out the violet, the one that had been pressed in the pages. He placed it in my hand. "Keep this," he whispered. "It was your grandmother's. It's the only part of her that survived the storm." For a long moment, none of us moved. The diner's old clock ticked, steady and certain, as if measuring the end of something sacred. Sometimes confrontation doesn't bring chaos. It brings peace, the kind that only comes when every truth finally steps into the light. The following days unfolded like the slow turning of a page. The authorities arrived at dawn to take statements, and for once, my grandfather didn't hide. He told them everything: the false signatures, the hidden accounts, the forged seals that Samuel had made while Richard was abroad. The folio, long thought to be the evidence of his guilt, became the proof of his innocence. When the story broke in the papers, it didn't come with the noise I expected. No headlines screaming scandal, no reporters at my door. Just a quiet column tucked inside the local section. Decades-old Whitford case reopened. New evidence clears patriarch. I sat at the counter of the same diner where it all began, reading it with my morning coffee. My grandfather had been taken to a care facility. His heart was failing fast, but I visited him every evening. We spoke less of the past and more of small things. The smell of rain, the songs he remembered from his youth, and whether violets could grow in autumn. A few weeks later, he handed me one final envelope. "For you," he said softly. "Your inheritance." Inside wasn't money or deeds or jewels. It was a simple key, identical to the one that had opened the drawer in the old mansion, but newer, shinier. Attached was a note. "To my granddaughter, the truest Whitford. This key unlocks the small cabin by the lake. It's yours now, not for wealth, but for peace." I drove there the next day. The cabin was modest, nothing like the mansion. A single room with peeling paint and wildflowers creeping through the porch steps. But when I opened the door, sunlight poured in across shelves filled with notebooks, sketches, and letters, all in my grandfather's handwriting. He had spent years documenting not his misfortune, but his repentance, his love for the family he'd lost, and the woman he'd never forgotten. Every page ended the same way, "For Lily, and for the one who will remember her." I sat there for hours, reading, crying, understanding. The violet he'd given me rested beside the lamp, still vibrant in the light. When he passed a month later, the only item he requested to be buried with was his silver pen. The same one I'd first noticed in his pocket that night. I placed it in his hand myself. People often ask if I regret opening the folio, if it was worth the danger, the fear, the confusion. And I always tell them this. The truth isn't something you find by accident. It finds you when your heart is finally honest enough to hold it. That forgotten folio didn't just rewrite a family's history. It reminded me that courage isn't about what you uncover, but what you choose to do once you know. And every spring since, I visit that lake cabin. I plant violets by the waterline, one for each year of silence, now broken. Because in the end, the real inheritance wasn't gold or land or a legacy. It was remembrance. And remembrance, when carried with love, is priceless. It's been 3 years since that night in the diner. 3 years since I picked up a leather folio that didn't belong to me, and somehow found everything I'd been missing. The diner's still there.
So am I.
But now there's a framed photo behind the counter. A black and white portrait of my grandfather standing beside the lake, his hand on a cane, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. Next to it sits a small vase with a single violet. I replace it every week. People come in, order their coffee, and ask about the photo. I tell them a simpler version of the story, about an old man who carried too much guilt and a young woman who learned that forgiveness can travel backward through time if you let it. They usually smile, say something kind, and go about their day. But every so often, someone lingers. The ones who've lost family, or faith, or the thread of who they thought they were. They ask if I ever wish I hadn't opened that folio. I always pause, because I want the answer to feel as real to them as it still feels to me. Then I tell them, no. Because sometimes the things we're afraid to look at are the very things waiting to set us free. When I lock up at night, I sometimes think about how easily that folio could have been thrown away, how close I came to walking right past the story that was meant for me. It makes me wonder how many people are walking around with their own hidden inheritance, a letter, a memory, a truth that wants to be found. So if you ever find something that stirs your curiosity, a photo, a keepsake, a name you don't recognize but somehow feel connected to, don't ignore it. Hold it gently. Let it speak. Because the world doesn't hand us coincidences. It hands us chances, quiet invitations to remember who we are and who we still might become. And maybe, like me, you'll find that the smallest act of curiosity can open the door to an entire new life. One violet at a time.